calibration is not just about setting the settings correctly on the TV. There's lots more to calibration than just that. So let's move on to that, but we're going to talk projectors because it's an area we haven't covered for quite some time. So it's that time of year we're going to be getting new projectors announced over the next few months and so on. We've already discussed the Sonys. So let's move on to the subject. It's one of the reasons why Ricky's on the podcast tonight. Ricky is a specialist with projectors as well, a calibrator. So Ricky, what's the number one mistake that you think people make when it comes to installing the first projector in the first cinema room?
Well, I think when you talk about projection system, people often go for a white screen, which is fine if you have the perfect room. So if you have a perfectly black back cave, material on the wall and everything like that, a white screen is your reference. Problem is a lot of rooms have reflections in there, which is going to impact on the image. So it's when people talk about having a back cave, people often think just blocking the light from doors, windows is enough, but it's not. A lot of the reflective surfaces are also going to impact on the image. So really, when you're talking about projection, you need to consider the screen, the room, and the projector, and get all three married up correctly. Because if you don't get one of them right, you're not going to get an optimum picture.
One of the common mistakes I see made, Ricky, and obviously I know the reasons for this, but I'm just going to ask you the questions because you guys are the experts that we've got on tonight, and I want to give you airtime, as much airtime as possible. But one of the things I see is some people go out and spend quite a bit of money on a JVC and then shove it in a white room.
Oh, yeah.
How do you educate before people go, and how do you do it in such a way that you're not forcing people to do maybe something they don't want to do, but how do you get the message across?
you have to explain why that's an issue, because a JVC, as long as you've got no natural light in a room, a JVC black floor is potentially going to be the same because you've got nothing actually impacting on it. As soon as you put light onto that image, it's going to start reflecting in the room, so it comes out of black a lot quicker. So you will start to go grey rather than retaining those blacks because it's reflecting off the walls, the ceiling, the floor, anything else in the room as well. So it's about trying to explain that to people so they understand why JVC might not be optimum in there. Having said that, using a right screen, using an ambient light projecting screen can help with that. People talk about ambient light projecting screens having a viewing cone, which means it reflects more light back to the middle and not to the sides, which people talk about that as a negative. But in fact, that can be a positive because it's keeping light off the walls, off the ceiling, off the floor to help to stop those reflections. It's about marrying everything up. A JVC will still perform well in a lighter room, but just not to its optimum.
And Jules, your experience dealing with projectors, what is it the common mistake that you see from time to time, that the one thing you always have to correct for the consumer?
Well, just like Ricky's been saying, you'll find projectors in white rooms, and people don't quite realise the impact that's going to have on the picture. So you lose a lot of contrast. Everything's reflecting off the walls. So that's the biggest mistake. I think it's not just, people think about light coming in from outside, and that's very important to block that out, but also it's the reflectivity of your room, and obviously black is best. But if you can't go black, people putting projectors in living rooms, more sort of media room sort of things, where you can't go completely black. In that case, you're going to have to look at your screen in order to help you out. But the ideal is black room, white screen.
And it is funny, any light in the room will kill your contrast quite quickly.
Oh,
and, the best example I saw of that was it was a demo, and it was in a professional demonstration facility. It was all black, the walls were all black and so on. But the 19-inch rack was sitting behind the viewing area. And as soon as the amplifier switched on and you had the light from the amplifier, it was a black hole until this light came on, and it killed the contrast in the room.
Yep.
And it was just one small light coming on an amplifier.
Yeah.
And it's trying to get that message across, I think, is very, very difficult.
Well, it's even professionals don't get it right. I remember you mentioned the JVC in the white room, and I did a calibration in Kensington a few years back, and the client, the installer was saying, and of course we put the JVC in the room because it's got the best black levels, but the room was completely white, and I'm thinking that this doesn't make sense. But also commercially, over my horrible last week, went to view Cinema in Carlisle to watch a film, and the amount of ambient light in that room was awful. Exit light was shining onto the screen. The bottom quarter of the screen was green. If you can get that right, you're on the way to a good picture.
Now, we've mentioned JVC, but there are other projection technologies out there. So if you have a room that's not optimal, are there other technologies that you might specify, Ricky, in terms of maybe combating ambient light that's in the room, other than the light rejection screen? Would you recommend a 3-chip DLP, for example?
DLP we don't do an awful lot of, to be honest. You have got the optomers and things like that, but realistically, we often find the Epsoms do very well. We find the 3 main brands we find sell very well, very good quality, are the Epsoms, the Sonys, and the JVCs. And we often find to a price point is the Epsoms, and the JVC is at the higher price point. Epsom have got some good projectors. They've got bulb projectors. They've now got some laser projectors that push out a lot of light and can work in rooms that are less than ideal. And they tend to be the ones that people go for, plainly because flexibility is quite often these are in living rooms. You need a good amount of lens shift and things like that, which the LP struggle with. They don't necessarily have as much of that flexibility.
Yeah. Okay.
And the other thing they struggle with, isn't it, is P3 for HDR.
Obviously, for years they struggled with Rec 709. So asking them then to go to P3, I think I've seen 2 that have done it, and that was because they had filters in the light path, and even then you're cutting your brightness by almost 20%, 30% because you've got this filter in the light path. Right. So we've covered the room. Try and get the room as correct as you can in terms of reflection points and wall colours and so on. And I've mentioned it in a few previous podcasts. There are paints out there now that you can specify that look nice. Greys are in fashion at the minute in terms of interior design. Grey is a great colour to use to try and combat reflections and keep the screen as neutral as possible and so on. So let's move on to the actual calibration. Ricky, how does it vary or differ from calibrating a TV?
Well, you've got to take into account the screen in the room to start off with. We usually use a two-stage approach. So we would measure off the screen to create a reference profile, but then actually measure off the projector for the actual measurements, because especially when you're getting to the black levels, you've got really low light output. So your meter needs to be nice and sensitive. If you're trying to measure that black light output and the low sort of greys, it's going to struggle on a screen, a lot of meters. You use the profiles with 2 meters. That way it takes into account the screen as well. You would normally do that.
Okay. Jules, in your experience, what are the tips that you would give people in terms of, getting the calibration correct for their projector and room? Meter position in relation to the screen is important. It's too close to, you don't want to be measuring off your own shadow. It's Ricky mentions the right thing. You've got to take into account the screen. Some of those have color temperature shift in them as well. Some of them are quite tinted bluish in order to make them appear brighter. Taking measurements off the screen to take that into account, because you're seeing reflected light as opposed to a TV, which is self-emitting. It's direct light. Yeah. Okay. So if you've got a client out there who's obviously looking at a projector, they're looking at getting the projector as accurate as possible, and they are looking at the entire system, what is it they need to be thinking about, Ricky, really, at the end of the day? Is it the budget, or is it more a case of what is it you're trying to achieve and then trying to fit the budget around that?
If people have got a set budget, you've got to look at it properly. Don't spend it all in one area. So don't spend it all on the projector and get a £50 screen or something like that. You need to spread that budget wisely across the whole system. And if anything, you spend more on the screen first, because it's passive. So it will go through lots of different upgrades. Whereas a projector moves with technology. A screen, if you get a right screen, can last you years and years.
Yeah, it's a bit like buying hi-fi, Ed. If you get the speakers right, normally the speakers are the one constant.
For years, we decided to switch that around and concentrate on front end first because that was sort of turntable related. But yes, fundamentally, the similarity is take the space that you have, don't overdrive it, and don't essentially work with what you have. And the chaps are completely. That's a very recognisable thing. The budget should be evenly distributed, and just make sure that things don't that you don't fall down a sort of target fixated rabbit hole of going for one particular aspect of it being significantly at odds with the rest of it.
Yeah. So. Okay. Final question on this one, because I'm aware of time. HDR. How big of a pain is HDR when it comes to projection, Ricky?
Yeah, well, you've got limited light output, so it's not going to be the same as a TV. So different manufacturers deal with it different ways. Potentially JVC with their dynamic HDR is recognized as being a very good way of doing it, where they manipulate the image depending on what's on the scene. Sony also tries to do that, but maybe not to the same sort of level, whereas Epson is a bit more static at the moment, but they are trying to improve. So yeah, it's a struggle. You can create custom curves for some of them. You can target different EOTFs. You can clip different things at the top, but it's just about making the best of the light output you've got.
And what about adding in a separate processor, video processor? Is that still a route that people can take?
Yeah, if you want to get the best out of it, adding something like a Lumagen or a Mad VR, something in there, it just has a lot of processing power. So it can analyze the image and it will work to the light level you've got with that projector. So as good as the JVC is with theirs, the processing power is just far bigger on something like a Lumagen and a Mad VR to be able to process it. And it just allows you to get an image that isn't crushed in kind of light output, but also resolve more detail, rather than it all being either too bright or too crushed.
Yeah. Okay. And Jules, anything to add to the end of that?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the other benefits of video processor will handle your auto aspect ratio switching, which if you're watching a Nolan film, is great. I've got an NZ8 JVC with a Mad VR, and it, the 16:9 content is centered in the screen, and it detects it and puts everything in the right place at the right time. So, no fiddling around with lens memories.
Okay.